Okay, welcome. My name's Gene Tracy. I'm director of the Center for Liberal Arts. And welcome to the second of our Call 300 Visitor Series for the spring of 2018. To begin with, I'd like to thank our co-sponsors. That would be our new program in Native Studies, brand new program, and our friends in the Dean's Office who help with support. I'd also like to give a shout out to both Ben Boone and Sharon Morris, without whom these events would not happen. They've done a great job putting all this together. I'd also like to invite all of you to join us at the reception afterwards, following the Q&A. The reception will be upstairs out the back across the hall in Tidewater. It'll give you a chance to interact more directly with our speaker if you'd like to, meet him one-on-one. Also, to those of you who are in the overflow room in Tidewater already, welcome to you, and you get first dibs on the cookies, so this all evens out. So tonight we will take both written and oral questions, just like we did last time. So during the talk, if it prompts a question, if you came with a question, you should have gotten a 3x5 card on your way in. If you didn't, raise your hand and we'll make sure you get one. As the person who will be reading those questions in a short time, I ask you to be kind to me and write clearly so that it's easy for me to read. I would appreciate that very much. I'll do my best. We'll do our best to get all of them, and if not, come see our speaker at the reception. So, as these slides that have been cycling through convey, Call 300 is that part of our new curriculum that aims to lift us out of our familiar surroundings. These on-campus courses are associated with this part of our new curriculum are aligned with a semester theme, and they involve a series of 3 visitors, and then an end-of-semester academic festival, which will be happening in a few weeks, and I think you'll all enjoy that. This semester's theme is sustainability, and we aim to approach that theme, because this involves many different courses, not just one course. We aim to approach that theme from many directions, not just from the perspective of environmental sustainability, but also from cultural sustainability, and that brings it into contact with fields like history and memory, so literature and the arts. And that connects us with the hard task of building communities that will endure. So that's the way we want to approach the theme of sustainability. Now, we ask each of our Call 300 visitors to share of themselves, not just to come and give an academic talk. And so we ask them to interrogate that Call 300 theme from their own lived experience. Why did they choose the particular path they took in life? How does it relate to the theme? And what's at stake? Why does it matter? So our speaker tonight, Doug Herman, is a perfect blending of those different aspects of this theme of sustainability. And that because he blends both scholarly study with active engagement with the world we live in. So Doug received his PhD in 1995 in geography and a certificate in urban and regional planning from the University of Hawaii in Manoa. His undergraduate degree is in comparative religion, modified with geography from Dartmouth. He combines his backgrounds in comparative religion and cultural geography to explore indigenous knowledge and what it teaches humanity about how to live on planet Earth. He's currently senior geographer at the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., where he specializes in the cultural knowledge of the Hawaiian and Pacific Islands. His work focuses on the revitalization of traditional knowledge and values as lessons for all people on how to live more sustainably today, so perfect connection with the theme. He combines scholarship in the traditional sense with activism and a hands-on approach to his work, as you can see right in front of us. This is a model that Doug built, and I'm sure he'll talk more about this. In addition to publishing dozens of scholarly articles, contributing to essays regularly in Smithsonian Magazine, he created Pacific Worlds, which is a web-based indigenous geography project for the American Pacific, and that's the first online resource of its kind for educators who want to teach about that part of the world. And in 2013, he built his own outrigger canoe, which wouldn't fit on the stage here. Now he's sailed short trips with the Hokulea and the Hikanaelia, and he gives public lectures on traditional oceanic navigation and canoe building. The title of Doug's talk tonight is In the Canoe, Intersections in Space, Time, and Becoming. So let's welcome our guest, Doug Herman.
Whee! Can we dim the lights up here, please? That are shining on the screen. Aloha! Lame. Okay, trying that again. Aloha! Mai ka'i loa. Okay. Olana kila ka'u inoa. Hawaii ha'aha aoi. Kuma'ane. No ka kuka ana. Piliana kia maomea. I'm very happy to be here, honored to be here, humbled, in fact, to be here to talk with you all tonight. Huge thanks. Can you hear me, by the way? Is it loud enough? Thank you. Big thanks to Jean and Ben and Sharon and Casey and everybody else who has made this possible. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I just threw this talk together this morning, so I'm going to have to periodically glance at my notes to figure out what it is that I'm doing, so bear with me. But the most important thing, I'm glad I just looked at it, because now I know what I'm going to say next. For the next, how long are we in here, Jean? 6:30, so about an hour and a half. For the next hour and a half, we are on the canoe. That's what this talk is about, and that's why it's called On the Canoe. In oceanic cultures, the canoe is what brought the peoples to the islands where they lived over a period of 1,500, maybe 1,500 years, maybe longer. Brought us to where we are now. Where we can go from here is leading us into the future to understand Pacific Island cultures again and the strengths of the ancestors and the traditions and what it means to really put yourself out there and to learn to work together for a cause. So what we're doing tonight is that same thing. We are in here, we are working together. I'm the navigator, you're the crew. It's all good. The room is the canoe, and that's fine. And just like any other canoe voyage, at the end of the journey, we'll land and you'll all get off and we'll all go our separate ways. But this is how things work in life, is we have these moments, these intersections where we are on the canoe with whoever we're with, in whatever it is. When you go to your class at the university for that 50 minutes or hour and a half or however long it is, you're on the canoe. You're there together. You're traveling through space and time together, the common purpose, and then you go off and do different things. Now, generally, when Pacific Islanders set out to explore the vast Pacific Ocean, they didn't know what was out there. And they're looking to see what they can find. And what they're looking for is pretty much tiny dots of land. And when you know where the destination is that you're going to, even though it's pretty far away, you need to be able to see the island. So from Hawaii to Tahiti is 2,300 miles across the equator. And when the Micronesian navigator Maupiailug, at that time one of the last navigators in the world, brought to Hawaii to navigate the Hokulea canoe, and the Hawaiians said, we want you to teach us how to navigate. So he trained a young Hawaiian fellow named Nainoa Thompson, and first they did their 1976 voyage, and then later on they wanted to do a second voyage. Mau came back, trained Nainoa again, and finally at the end of the training, he took him out to the eastern point of the island of Oahu before dawn, looking at the stars. And Mau would say, okay, which way is this island? Which way is that island? Which way is the other island? And Nainoa would have to point. And finally, Mau said, which way is Tahiti? And Nainoa said, that way. And Mau said, can you see the island? 2,300 miles away. And I know it was sort of, well, and Mao said you need to be able to see the island here. Because when you see your destination, you know where it is. Even if you're blown off over this way or blown off over that way, you still know where the island is. You can still find it, even though you can't see it. Now, here's what it's like to actually try to see islands. You see a bunch of islands there, correct? A bunch of islands in a row, yes? No, that's not what you're seeing at all. What you're seeing, there's a laser pointer out here, Gene's, I'm standing here and I'm shooting this way, and you see a bunch of islands that are not in a row at all, and then some of these islands back here. So you see some that are very low, and you see some that are much more up front. And if I moved further away, that would disappear below the horizon altogether. I believe it's about 7 miles out to sea is the visibility before things drop over the horizon. So, first of all, anytime you're on a journey on the canoe in the middle of the ocean, where are you again? Thank you. You are on the canoe. So you could look at it in terms of the canoe's actually standing still and the ocean's moving underneath you. Because you're not moving anywhere. You're just sitting on the canoe. So once you see the island, here's what you're going to do. How many people all seen Moana? Wow, pretty much everybody. Pretty cool. All right, well, we might get to talking about that later. But then you know who this is. He doesn't look like a hippo with piggy little eyes. That is Maui, one representation of Maui. Maui was always used to look like a svelte young man. That's how he was always represented. He's got this giant hook. And what you're going to do is you're going to take this giant hook and you're going to throw it and hook the island. And now what you're going to do is you're going to pull the island to you. So again, this notion of you're staying in one place, you're pulling the island to you, and as it gets closer and closer and closer, it finally rises up over the horizon. So they talk about it in terms of fishing the island out of the sea. We're going to pull that island to us, and I've always, one of the things I've always wanted to do is to raise Tahiti. I want to sail on the Hokulea, or any canoe really, from Hawaii to Tahiti and pull that island out of the sea. It's a pretty exciting thought. So tonight, I was asked to talk about my own journey and my own experience, which is always kind of a weird thing to do. I'd much rather talk about somebody else, but I'll do it. And before we embark on that journey, as we should with any journey, we need a chant, don't you think? So, I'm going to do the send-off chant or arrival chant. You can use it either way. It was written for one of the voyaging canoes. And it says, yay the canoe, the canoe's so big you don't even feel the spray of the sea. The navigator is so good he can handle even the worst weather. We're gonna move the canoe forward with the paddle and the baler and the baler and the paddle. We're gonna land over here at this new land or land over there at that new land. Hooray, the canoe's arrived. That's what it says. Ready? Aue wahiti e hokulea e. Aue uahiti e. Hele ka vai ke kai e ho'okele wa'ala ino e a ole puhu wala nui e. Aue uahiti e. E lau hoi mai ka wa'a I ka hoi I ke ka I ka hoi. E pai aku I ka aina la e pai mai la I ka aina e. Aue uahiti e. All right. Thank you. Now, anytime you start on a journey, what do you need? What would be nice to have? How about a map? Good idea? All right. Maps are good. Yes, that's right. I'm a geographer. So here is Maupiailug as a young man teaching the Micronesian way of learning the stars and their paths across the sky. Just see where I am here. Yep. But knowing the journey is more than just knowing the indicators and the signposts along the way. You have to know the currents. You have to know sea marks, as they call them, things you might expect to encounter along the way. So the navigators, the paths that the navigators travel, there's a lore that goes with it that you would learn so that you would know all of this. Basically, you are learning from those who have gone before you and made it and come back to tell the tale. All oral tradition, no actual map. And that's what we need here. So I'm going to share with you tonight a little bit about my choice of destination and about my map. My choice of destination, and I'm not really sure how I got to it, is I want to become fully human. I want to become a self-realized individual. It took me a while to figure out what that was and what that might mean, but I knew that I didn't want to do anything less than that. And maybe by the end of my life, I will have accomplished that. But, you know, as they say, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination necessarily. So that's where we go. And I'm going to share with you some of what I've learned along the way and some of the things that I have received, some of the maps, if you will, or the pieces of map. I feel like, you know, I'm in one of these sort of kids' movies where you get a piece of the map here, and then later you get another piece, and they fit together, and you get another piece. Yeah, something like that. Or maybe it's more like GIS, and you're getting layers of information that you superimpose in, and the map gets more and more dense as you go. So, there you go, layers of my map. So, I was raised in Washington, D.C., and this is the church that I went to as a young man, as a child actually. My house is pretty much right across the street and one house down on the other side. So this is a church I grew up with, was very involved in, played in, did all kinds of stuff. Beautiful old Episcopal church. My father was a Jew, a German Jew. My mother was well, let's just call her Christian because it's too complicated to go into any of that. And what we know is that Jesus, you heard of him? Okay, just checking. Jesus told us a whole bunch of stuff about what to do, how to act. And it's pretty good stuff. In fact, it's really good stuff. The problem that I have is how that stuff has been interpreted in popular culture. And in some cases by churches themselves. Kind of not really what I got out of it. And so, but very good start. And, you know, as Robin Williams used to say, the comedian Robin Williams used to say, the great thing about the Episcopal Church is it's the one church where you don't have to check your brain at the door. I hope I'm not insulting anybody with that. But that was certainly my experience. I was, you know, a acolyte, a choir boy, ultimately an altar boy. And while the priests were doing the communion stuff, I'd be sitting there in this beautiful wood-carved sanctuary with limestone arches, and it would give me some time to actually think about this stuff and just sort of think about, well, what is this business about God anyway, and all this kind of stuff. And you know, and I said to people at some point, I don't believe in God. I hear a lot of young people say this, I don't believe in God, but there's something out there, right? You know, there's a kind of sense that there's something there. So that's kind of where I was. But then I had the privilege, and yes, I will call it privilege, to attend St. Albans Episcopal School, where I got some more of that. But I also had a 7th grade social studies teacher who had been in the Peace Corps. He was a priest, an Episcopal priest. But he had to teach us world religions. And so I'm hearing for the first time about yogis and Zen meditation and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I'd like to find out more about this. Well, I also got very interested in science, and I ended up going to Dartmouth College as an advanced placement physics major. The hardest 2-course track at Dartmouth College. I lasted 1.5 semesters out of that before I realized, A, this is over my head, B, this isn't as fun as it used to be, and C, I just took this religion course and I really liked that. I think I'm going to switch my major. So I did. And part of, I think, the story of the journey is that things happen along the way in all of our lives, sometimes very simple, short little things that end up changing the whole direction of where we're going. And we need to watch for those. The wind comes from a different direction all of a sudden. Ooh, let's catch that wave. Let's catch that wind. Turn the sails. Let's head over there and see if there's something over there, because this feels right. So that's what happened, and I ended up being a religion major focusing on Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism. These sort of Eastern traditions have a lot in common. They're related to each other. And I really enjoyed it. And then one of these chance things came along. I was pretty unhappy at college, and a friend of mine came by one day. He'd just gotten film back from the developer. Yeah, right. Back when we didn't have digital cameras and you actually had film. And he said, look at my pictures. He said, I just spent the weekend up in this Buddhist lay community up in northern Vermont, and here's my pictures of this place and what it was all about. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. You know, I think it'd be nice to do something like that, except I want to do it in California because I want to get the hell off the East Coast. This place is driving me nuts. So somebody from the religion department gave me a list of Buddhist organizations in California, and I just started ringing them up. Hi, I'm 21, and I'm coming over to California, and I'm looking for a place where I can hang out and learn something about Buddhism and work for my room and board. And the first group said, no, you can't do that here. And the second group said, no, you can't do that here. And the third group said, oh, who are you again? And you want to do what exactly? And I explained it to them again, and they said, well, okay, you can do that here, but you need to know this is Orthodox Zen Buddhism. We are not Americanized. This is not softened. We get up at 3:30 in the morning. You will work 8 hours a day. You will follow the 5 lay precepts of no killing, cheating, lying, stealing, etc. You will be vegetarian. You will not be taking intoxicants. And I said, all right, let me get back to you. And I went and talked to an older friend of mine, and he said, who had been through some stuff in his life, and he said, you know, sometimes you need to go 100%. And I said, you know, you're right. And I called him back up, and I said, I'll be there in a week. Maybe it's 2 weeks, whatever. So I got out there, and let's see, where am I in my slides? Oh, first I want to throw out some of the things that I learned, some of the common threads that I found in the Eastern religions that really appealed to me. The manifest world arises from the unmanifest world and returns back to it. This world that we understand as multitudinal and diverse has a fundamental underlying unitary nature. Interesting. And this was the key thing. There's a pretty straightforward formula for human action that could move us towards greater understanding and ultimately even unity with this divine nature. Wow, there's a path from where you are now to unity with divinity. Wow. And there's instructions, there's maps on how to do this. Jesus gave us one of those maps, if you know how to read it. Now, the path for each individual is different depending on your karma, that is to say, the past history, energies that you and your ancestors and your past lives and whatever, and they believe in past lives, have brought into this. But what you're really going to do here is you're going to step by step dismantle your ego. Because we believe ourselves to be individuals, but these religions say that's a mirage. We're not individuals. And once you can see past your individuality, then you're really onto something. Sound like fun? Well, it's something to do. You got something better to do? Okay, karma is our manifestations and our connections with people and places and so forth and so on. Now, my experience in approaching this stuff, I thought this was all pretty cool, but as I talk to young people today, like some of the young people in this room today, I find that the notion of religion in America today, unless you're one of the true believers of whatever, take your pick, really, religion doesn't kind of hold much water anymore. We're rational, scientifically informed human beings. We live in a very secular society for the most part. Maybe you go to church, maybe you go to, I saw a statistic today, 65% of Christians go to church on Christmas. Who knew? How much do they go the rest of the year? And more importantly, if you go to church on Sunday, what do you do in the rest of the day Sunday, and what do you do in the rest of the week? That's something to know. So, religion, I was talking to some classes yesterday and today, and they're sort of, I asked the question, to what extent on a scale of 1 to 10 do you believe that there are guardian angels, saints, bodhisattvas, gods, God, spiritual beings up there that you can ask for help and expect to get something? And out of a class of 30-something people, I think 3 or 4 hands went up. Wow, religion doesn't hold much water anymore. What about science? Is that better? Let's check it out. Let's see what science has to say. So that's what because I had all this science background. I had done 5 years of science in 4 years of high school. I had chemistry, physics, biology, genetics, all this kind of stuff. I was into it. It was fun. I was a nerd. Times has changed. So, the science I'm going to start with here in this case is the science of psychiatry. And unfortunately here, we got pretty messed up by this guy, Sigmund Freud. Now, Freud's model of the psyche, I pulled this off the internet, modified it a little bit. So the psyche is like this iceberg, and sort of disproportional, should be less of it poking out above and more of it down below. Up there we have the conscious mind, the mind that we are all exercising right now, that is aware, that is listening, seeing, feeling, smelling. We have an ego, that is our sense of identity, of individuality, and calls the shots, makes the decisions. And then you've got your pre-conscious, your sort of stuff that's readily accessible to your conscious mind, but then there's the unconscious stuff. Look at the list here. Drives, instincts, repressed traumas, painful emotions. Do you see anything good in there? No, it's all the creepy, slimy, scary, dark, but possibly fun, but naughty stuff. Ooh. That's all it is. Oh my gosh. Well, I think we can get rid of that. Doesn't work for me, and I don't think it has helped our understanding of ourselves very much. So I turned instead to his counterpart, Carl Jung, who has a very different approach to this whole psyche stuff. Let me just check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything important here. Jung saw the unconscious as an enfolded order within ourselves and our relationship to the universe. And he identified, and this is my sort of quick and dirty take on his model based on following the model I just showed you of Freud's. So we have the collective, the unconscious as a whole is much bigger here. Conscious way up the top, ego there. It's that same personal unconscious once again. But then we have this huge mass of stuff, and that's what Jung was interested in. And yes, it has our instincts and our drives and all of that stuff, but that stuff is good. That stuff is supposed to be there. That is how we as biological organisms learn to survive over the millions of years of evolution since the spaceships dropped us off. Or we climbed out of the primordial slime, or however you want to think about it. It's encoded in us. That whole DNA. It's so much fun to talk about DNA, but so much, how much is it? Somebody give me the percent. It's like 90% of what is in our DNA, we don't know what it does. They call it junk DNA. Do you believe it's junk? No. It's there for a purpose. You want to check something out? Read a book called The Cosmic Serpent. It talks about this. Anyway, so Jung is saying the unconscious is there, and it's trying to evolve us, the conscious mind. That's what all these drives are. These drives are not dirty, nasty, creepy, and scary. These drives are us trying to become fully human. a process that Jung called individuation, where we become whole. We start out, we're scared of the unconscious because it's dark, it's the shadow side, it is the stuff that we repress. We do shove it in there, but not supposed to shove it in there. We're supposed to integrate it into ourselves, absorb it, and become whole. These things have their place. Use them. So Jung said, the unconscious is a process, and the psyche is transformed or developed by the relationship of the ego to the contents of the unconscious. Wow, that's pretty interesting stuff. Now, the problem is, our ego and our conscious selves, particularly in 21st century American society, we don't like to think that way. We're into something called rationality. We're going to make rational decisions. I call this rationality with the small r, for those of you who read my article on this. And it's the small r because 21st century rationality has thrown out all the stuff that our ancestors learned. No, that's, what do we call it, backwards, savage, barbaric, old-fashioned, heathen. It's just not any good anymore because since the Enlightenment, we've really learned how to think rationally and to seek truth and so forth and so on, and to use our rational thinking to deal with everything. Well, the rational mind and rational thinking is a very good thing. But to me, rationality with a capital R would incorporate all the knowledge and wisdom that our ancestors gave us instead of throwing it out. So ultimately, that's where I'd like to see things head. Now, this rationality with a smaller, any economists in the room, economics majors? Come on, admit it. There's got to be one. Business majors? People who want to make money, hands up. Okay, thank you. Have you heard of the phrase economic rationalism? I only have 5 minutes left. Whoa, I got a lot more to do here. Homo economicus, the idea that we're going to make rational decisions. Economic rationality means that you're going to make decisions that make the most money for you. That is economic rationalism. It hasn't worked out so well for us. The other scientist I turn to is Stanislav Grof, who conducted 3 decades of research with LSD and dying cancer patients originally, and then he learned how to create the same psychedelic experience without the use of drugs. And he, like Jung, said, wow, the unconscious holds a lot more information and access to information beyond the bounds that the mechanistic models of reality say we should have access to. Unbelievable, the things that he saw and experienced, what he calls transpersonal experiences, that is to say knowledge that is going beyond yourself. He hooked in with sort of Niels Bohr's, the physics about light, whether it's the whole issue of whether it acts as waves or particles, and you can see from the chart sometimes it acts as one, sometimes it acts as another. So sometimes we experience ourselves as individuals, and sometimes we transcend that sense of being individuals. So this is pretty much the same list I saw presented before. No clear boundary between consciousness and the world. States of mind and what happens in the world are mutually constitutive. Where we are at in our being affects the encounters that we actually have in the world, and that we have a pre-programmed drive to become fully human. You have a choice, however. We all have choice. You can go the other way. You can go the selfish way, and you can become more attached, more focused on yourself, more guarded against the world. We call that the dark side. So, Grof said the only way he can explain his data is that the perceived world represents only a fragment of the reality, an unfolded or explicate order. The unfolded explicate order emerges out of an enfolded or implicit order. So the spiritual map that the Buddhists came up with to explain how to deal with all this is the Kalachakra Mandala. It has 4 gates. It's a tiered mountain. You're looking at the top of a tiered mountain. You enter through whichever gate your personality and state of being in the world puts you at, and you're going to encounter whatever issues and obstacles and trials and tribulations on your way. But you've set your hook in the top of the mountain, and you're going to get there if you try hard enough and if you work really hard enough. Not everybody does make it, but that's what we're aiming for. So I had this, as I was saying earlier, the fortunate experience to go to this Buddhist monastery. I spent 2 months in there, and it gave me the map, a very good map. It's not the only map, but it's a very good map. But I also, in college, encountered the discipline of geography. Thank God for gen ed requirements. Took a course. Thought it was cool. It's the hub of the wheel of academic disciplines, and I learned about how the world works. And I thought, wow, maybe I can go out there and do something good. I wanted to go out and work on world hunger. That was my idea. In Asia, where it was a real issue. So I went to graduate school at the University of Hawaii. Hint out there, graduate school is a great way to avoid the real world for a few more years. But being in the University of Hawaii, I also came to learn about white privilege. White people constitute maybe 20-25% of the population of the state of Hawaii, and they don't like us, the rest of them out there, because during the plantation era that dominated the Hawaiian economy up until relatively recently, white people were the owners, everybody else was labor. Not a happy situation. And oops, then in 1893, a group of white people overthrew the legitimate government of the Kingdom of Hawaii, leading to the mess that we have today. So understanding one's white privilege, for those of you out there who are white, really, really important, more and more important all the time. It's real. Get used to it. I also had a chance encounter that led me to study the practice developed by a kahuna la'au lapa'au, a healing kahuna, which is a Hawaiian doctor, Morna Simeona, who had developed her own tool for becoming more fully human, linking your conscious mind and your subconscious mind together with what they call the superconscious mind, which is your link to the divinity. In Christianity, we'd call it the Christ consciousness. This is your connection to the divine nature out there, if only you knew how to call on it. Big secret revealed right now, everybody, remember this for the rest of your lives, you really do have a guardian angel. You just don't know how to call on it. It's there. And some of you, it's helping more than others. It's like a GPS. Okay, you make a choice that takes you this way. It goes recalibrating. Okay, now we'll take you that way. And tries to get you where you go. And it brings in the energy that sort of basically cleans up karma for you, kind of like calling in the cosmic demagnetizer to wipe files off your karmic hard drive. So basically what this practice gave me was a faster canoe, which was very handy. Next chance encounter, I ended up going on a solo hike on the 11-mile trail to the isolated Kalalau Valley on the island of Kauai, where I had a very deeply personal, spiritual encounter that really transformed me. It proved to me that there is more beyond what the scientific empirical model of the world tells us exists. So I went back and went into the head of the Hawaiian Studies program, who was an elderly Hawaiian gentleman, and I said, we need to talk. And that's how I got interested in Hawaiian and Pacific Island stuff, 2 years into my graduate work. So bringing this to a close, this led me to the work that I am doing today with Native communities. What I do is sort of community-based cultural documentation and preservation projects. It's a website called Pacific Worlds. I've done 7 communities. I'm working on number 8 right now, and I'm redoing the first one. And what this involves is going into the communities and interviewing elders and culture keepers. That's right, me, white boy from Dartmouth College. Are these people going to talk to me? Well, what I knew is that if these people are going to talk to me, are going to share their knowledge and wisdom with me, I have to demonstrate utmost integrity in my being. They have to see that I am real. and that I am honest, and I have to be honest with them, and I have to be honest with myself. There's no hiding. Indigenous people will see right through you, the wise ones, right away. They'll sum you up like that. So it became a practice, and there's another piece about being in the canoe, but I won't go there right now. It becomes a practice to do this. It is the spiritual path. Everything we do is the spiritual path, all of it. These are the choices we have to make. So if you want to do the spiritual path, get yourself a map. So I see the importance of people who have the traditional knowledge, who understand appropriate ways for us to live on the earth, to treat each other and the planet and all the living beings, including the rocks and the water and so forth, appropriately. People who recognize that we are always, all of us now, on the canoe. We're all in the same boat, especially with climate change and pollution and everything else. And then, let's see. For those of us who want to go the rest of the journey towards complete humanness, we do it not for ourselves, but for all living beings. Thank you. You talking to me? Turn his on. Turn yours on.
Is it on? Okay, good. All right, let's sit down. All right, what we'd like to do now is shift gears a little bit, and I would like to follow up with a few questions, bring up a few points to make sure that we're connecting this into the COLL 300 aspects of the event. And while we're doing this, we should be collecting the written questions. And in about 20 minutes, we'll turn this out over to Q&A. And if you have questions from the floor, we'll pick them up then. Okay, so Doug, nice talk.
Gene,
thank you.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you here.
Great to be here.
The path you were talking about is really kind of a twisty-turny one. And what drove you to just try something so different?
You know, it's funny. I've always talked about, I remember in my 20s saying to friends of mine who were also doing the spiritual stuff, oh, I've wandered off the path. I've fallen off the path. And this one woman said to me, you don't fall off the path. You're always on the path. So that's the funny thing. I mean, when I was in college, I was miserable. I entered college. A friend of mine had just been killed in a car accident. I went to his funeral, and it really had me pondering life and death. It's like, wow, okay. Here I am, freshman week in college, and I'm like, wow, life and death. This is pretty heavy. What are we really doing here? And I'm surrounded by drunk people saying, where's the party? And it's just not computing for me. I finally joined the party and had a good time. I did my share of partying, but then it burned out again. I was like, okay, this is it. That's all there is. And that's when this guy came by with these photos of this Buddhist thing, and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I thought, here I was, a religion major. I'd studied Buddhism. I was like, well, I know all this stuff. I must be practically enlightened by now. And I get to the monastery, and I remember my first night there, and this guy took me over to the Buddha hall where they were having ceremony, and he said, okay, you're going to go in there, and you're going to bow to the Buddha 3 times. And I said, I'm going to do what? He said, you're going to bow to the Buddha. And I was like, I'm saying to myself, I'm an American. I do not bow to the Buddha. You know, I don't know what you're talking about. So it was a sort of rude awakening to the difference between the intellectual side of spirituality and the practice of spirituality. That was what I didn't get before. It's not just, you can't read a zillion books on Buddhism or Hinduism or Taoism or even Christianity for that matter and become that fully realized person. You have to do it. And that's what leads me to things like, building canoes, doing things. You need to do things to really understand what they are. So I've always said that time in the monastery saved my life and gave me a map. And I've gotten other maps since then, but I just kind of felt, what else am I going to do, I guess?
Can we connect that to your time on the Hokulea? The actual, being on the canoe and out in the water and the experience of that in comparison to having studied it.
Right, and I'd studied it for quite a long time and lectured on it and read a lot about it and everything, but I was interviewing navigators. I worked on a major exhibition that never happened. The voyaging canoe was going to be the center concept. So I interviewed navigators and voyagers and so forth, and hearing about the experience from them, I really thought, I need to do this. If I'm going to be out there in public talking about this, and I haven't actually had my experience on the vessel, then I'm kind of shallow at this, which was a fancy way of saying, I really want to do this, and that's a good excuse. And it was great. It was great. Particularly the training trip I did on the Hikianalia, which was just from Oahu to the Big Island. But the channel between Maui and Hawaii Island is the roughest channel in the Hawaiian Islands. Basically, you got volcanoes sticking up out of the sea and the entire Pacific Ocean forcing its way through. So it was 15-foot seas and 27-knot winds, and everybody got seasick. But I got to steer by a star and be with a crew who, we were the crew. We were on the canoe. It was really great.
Beautiful. One thing that I would like to talk to you about while I have the chance here is the controversy surrounding the 30-meter telescope. I mean, I'm a theoretical physicist myself, and I've taught introductory astronomy. I loved astronomy as a child, and so for me, the idea of building these telescopes on Mauna Kea is a wonderful thing. It opens up these deeper views into the universe and so forth. And yet there's this controversy because those telescopes are being built on sacred ground. Could you talk a little bit about that controversy? And I know when we talked before that you said you can't take a position on this, but I'm interested more in this question of, can we find some common ground where the Native Hawaiian rights are respected, their spiritual sensibilities are respected, and yet we can still together explore the universe? Do you see that as a possibility?
Well, yeah, and as you've heard, I'm a scientist as well as a spiritual guy anyway. So yeah, I see the value in both. The problem with so Mauna Kea, 14,000, almost 14,000 feet tall, is considered, the top of the mountain is considered the most sacred place in the Hawaiian Islands. And there's already something like 20 telescopes up there. And the University of Hawaii, which is one of the main players up there, but by no means the only one, wants to build this giant 30-meter tower. And it's not just one building, it's like a complex of buildings. And it's huge. And the problem is how they went about it. So, and this seems to be an issue where science and indigenous people butt heads. I don't think the end goal was the problem so much as the process. So the science side, or the administrative side, maybe more than the science side, it's like, we'll hold a few quick community hearings, we'll get through this process of community input really quick, and then we'll move this forward because this is such a great thing. And we'll kind of rush on the environmental impact statement because, whatever, we're gonna build this, basically. So they cheated on the process, and they didn't do it right. And the Hawaiians said, and I can't say the Hawaiians, there's a lot of different groups out there with a lot of different attitudes about this, including some who are really in favor of this telescope. But they said, hey, first of all, you told us you weren't going to build any more telescopes up there. Now you're going to telling us you're going to build the biggest dang thing that's going to be up there. It's going to be visible. They're already visible from a distance. Now you're going to have this huge thing up there. And you kind of lied to us. And that's where the problem is. It's how we do things. These guys did not go into this process saying we need to exercise absolute integrity in order for this to happen. They went in saying, we can just sort of blow this off, whatever. Some Hawaiians might get angry, so what? And then they got huge protests. Protests are still going on today. So I look at it sort of sitting back as a neutral observer going, you guys blew it. You possibly could have made this happen, but you went about it wrong. You didn't treat people with respect. You didn't treat the indigenous knowledge with respect, and now you're paying the price. I hope they work it out, and that it comes up with somebody that serves everybody. But man, you go in there wrong from the beginning, you're in trouble.
Great, thanks. We talked a little bit about Kon-Tiki also, and when a lot of people I've mentioned over the years my interest in Polynesian voyaging and navigation, I immediately get questions about Kon-Tiki and, interest in that. It captured people's imagination, yet I know that the scholarship now suggests that Heyerdahl all got the whole sequence wrong and so forth. You want to talk about that a little bit?
It's so frustrating. As Gene said, I have my own 16-foot outrigger sailing canoe. I sail it off of Rocky Point outside of Baltimore. And about 1 out of every 4 times, I have to lash it together and unlash it when I'm done, and somebody will come up along and say, Kon-Tiki. 1 out of 4 times. And I'm like, no. I wasn't alive, when Kon-Tiki happened. It was about 1955, I think. But I guess, it got all this. It was a National Geographic documentary, or whoever put it together, and back then, there were only 3 or 4 television stations, so we all watched everything. And so everybody saw it. And it's an exciting story, and they made a recent movie about it, which is worth watching. I recommend it. It's kind of lauding Thor Heyerdahl and all that stuff. But these guys spent 3 months at sea on an unsteerable balsa wood raft and didn't rip each other's throats out. I'm pretty impressed by that. So it is an exciting story, but what's disappointing is that the story of Hokulea is not so well known. And you say, you heard of Kon-Tiki, hands will go up. You heard of Hokulea, nobody knows what I'm talking about. That's the problem. And I don't know what else can be done to sort of change that, except what I'm trying to do here and elsewhere in talking about it.
Okay, great. We also talked a little bit about this recent court decision in New Zealand.
Oh, yes.
Where a river, the Wanganui, was declared a legal person. And that always strikes me as intriguing. You want to
Very exciting.
Talk about that a little bit?
Very exciting. Well, from an indigenous perspective, everything on Earth is alive. Everything. The rocks are alive. The water is alive. And water is particularly alive because it moves and it cycles through 3 different phases, and it cycles through all of our bodies and back again. So we're all connected by water and connected to water. So it's really one of the most sacred things in the world. And the Maori of New Zealand in particular see it as a living being. An older New Zealand scholar once told me he had actually seen Maori women petting the water in a river and talking to it. I heard Lakota elder Alfred Whitehat talk about during World War II, his mother went down to the river to pray. And she went down to the river to pray because by praying at the water, the hydrological cycle would take the prayer all over the earth. So very, very powerful thing. Now, if a corporation can be a person, why can't the living water be a person? needs the protection that a person has. Look what we do to our rivers, full of pollution, all over the world, and yet they're our life source. So I think this is a really, really exciting step in a right direction that I hope spreads.
Okay. Before we cast this out to the floor, let me lighten up and just ask you about your thoughts about Moana.
Okay, how many of y'all who saw Moana liked Moana? How many of y'all didn't like Moana? Yeah, pretty much nobody. Okay, there's one. Actually, mixed feelings, right? Yeah, I had mixed feelings about it. The first time I went to see it, I was like, I don't know about this. And the second time I went to see it, I was, all right, I still don't know about this. Then, about a year later, my 9-year-old son said, let's watch Moana. So we did, and I loved it. So, you know, because I'd gotten past my scholarly, critical take on the movie, and I just enjoyed the voyaging, the canoes, all of that stuff that I've been so engaged with in my life. It just filled me with joy. So I've had my issues with it. I've written about my issues with it. I think it's important that those issues are out there, but it's pretty great.
All right. So
people in Hawaii, by the way, not so excited. Hawaiians on the mainland love it, is my experience. People in Hawaii, they're sort of, really? That's not what Maui's about. That's not what he looks like. He's not supposed to be a stupid, goofy idiot like that. He's a culture hero. He's supposed to be a svelte, handsome young man, trickster, very smart, yes, but not this sort of giant hippo with piggy little eyes.
Yeah, I've heard of that criticism.
Oh, he's got the cards out.
Got the cards out. Okay, so let me read a few to you, and then we'll open it to the floor and kind of iterate a little bit this way. So let's see. We spoke in class about technologies which overtook the need for indigenous tools, and therefore the need to sustain the preservation of this indigenous knowledge. As this continues to happen, how and why should we preserve knowledge which is no longer necessary to a society?
Whoa, no longer necessary. Necessary for what would be my question. And the next question I would ask is, what is it you really want to accomplish? If you're on the path to being fully human, then it's not about whether you can build the canoe. It's a matter of building the canoe. It's the learning that you go through in the process, whatever kind of tools it is. So it's about the engagement with the world. It's about doing things right. And a lot of times it's about, particularly in this age of computers and iPhones and all of that stuff, I think it's so important, and this is what the voyaging canoe is about too, it's so important to learn what it took our ancestors to do these simple things. Hours and hours and hours of work to do something small, and they had the patience to do it. Of course, they didn't have any other way to do it. If they had had bulldozers, they would have used bulldozers. But there's something about that connection to the integrity of the object and the working and the tools, indeed. And you ask any craftsman, and they'll tell you the same thing, that that's what it's about, not about the end result. And I see too much sacrificing the means for the ends in modern society. It doesn't matter how we get there, so long as we get there. I don't think that's right. And who gets hurt along the way, and so forth and so on. So if you're going to learn to be human, then try the old tools. Get out there and use them. You don't have to use them all the time, but do it once. Check it out. Learn from it. That's why.
So a number of the questions clearly want to pull on that thread.
Okay.
So various combinations of, can you talk a little bit more about your spiritual experience in Kauai? What was the nature of it, and how did it signify to you that there was more outside of empirical science?
I really don't want to talk about that. It's personal. It was for me. I think that's all I have to say. I know that's just. I know it's in. It's sort of mean to put the bait out there and say, sorry, I can't tell you about it. But it was really cool. But that's what I have to do.
Okay. What's one change that you've made in your life after this experience? After studying other religions and having this experience?
It's constant changes. It's always change, and it's always learning, and it's learning more respect. You know, in our very fast-paced, and believe me, when I was in college in 1986, it wasn't nearly as fast-paced as it is for you guys now. We hardly had computers, much less cell phones. So it's now so fast-paced, and to sort of stop and do something slowly, to stop all that rush and take time out in a Buddhist monastery for 2 months, I recommend it. Any kind of monastery. Just, it's a chill, it's a down time. It was cold inside the building, and I remember the Buddhist master saying, it's a cold place here, but that's good because our brains are overheated. You need to cool them down. You need to slow down. And I think any time we slow down, that's good. But I'm not quite sure that answers the question. Let's try another one, see if we can come at it from another angle.
How much of your own ideas regarding spirituality do you share with indigenous leaders, and do your views ever not align or cause tension?
I don't, well, when I'm talking with indigenous people, it depends on what our relationship is. Mostly they're telling me stuff and I'm going, yeah, I agree. Maybe I'll throw out a little example from my own, but that's not really what I'm there for. I do have some who become friends with whom I can have a more open conversation. But, you know, I don't want to talk about myself any more than I have to, really. You know, if they're interested, then yes, I will, but I don't usually feel that anyone's particularly interested. And no, there's never a misalignment. That's never, I mean, if they're spiritual, they're spiritual. The spiritual thing is the spiritual thing is the spiritual thing. That's it. It's all one thing. No matter what religion it is, it's all kind of the same dealio. If they're not doing the same dealio, then they're using the religion and not the spirituality. Because the religion can go way off over here. Yes, like the Crusades, for example. Let's go kill all these people, whatever it is. Let's stone people to death. That kind of stuff. Religion can tell us to do that stuff. That's not the spiritual path.
Why don't we try a few questions from the floor, and then we can come back to some of these. Anyone want to get at the mic now that you've heard?
Come on, it's our studio audience. There's one down the front. Sorry, I really always wanted to be a game show host.
You got the voice for it.
I've practiced.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm curious a little bit more about your Pacific World project. I'm wondering for what purpose that project serves. It seems to me a little bit like a digital humanities project, and I'm wondering how that relates to what you're doing.
It is very much a digital humanities project. It does three things. Number one, it documents traditional knowledge, which is disappearing or is under threat. And even to the extent that younger people are picking it up now, I mean, I know a lot of Hawaiians who are picking back up the spiritual knowledge, and they have master's degrees and PhDs. They're Western trained, and they're picking up the spirituality. They're not like the elders who didn't have that, the elders who really grew up when it was really real. It's different with them, and we got to get it from them while we can. And I'm doing it for them primarily. The rest of us can benefit from it if we want to, but it's primarily for them. So it's documenting, it's preserving it, and it's presenting it back to them in a format. And this draws from a project that it was kind of based on at my museum, where the elders say, we want a project that combines our traditional culture with modern computer technology because our kids are seeing it as an either or. And we need something that brings them together. So that's what it does. And then the third thing it does is there's curriculum to go with it. So it is actually aimed at educators. And I don't know how many educators use it. I do know that the website gets over 300,000 hits a month, which sounds like a lot. I don't really know if that is in the scheme of things, but it sounds good. Looks good on the grant application. I thought I saw another hand.
There's a follow-up.
Okay.
It actually connects to that question. So how do you go about documenting different indigenous cultures? The online utility is part of that. What's the first question you ask?
Where's the bathroom?
Yeah.
There is no first question. I mean, I've had people say, well, send us a list of questions and we'll take this to the elders. You don't need to come. And I was like, there is no list of questions. I don't come with a list of questions. I do come with a grid of information that I want to collect, and I have that grid in my mind all the time. But in dealing with indigenous peoples, or frankly, dealing with anybody in an island culture, anybody in Hawaii, you don't go into the office and say, okay, I need this. Can you get me that? No. That's mainland haole stuff. You go in and go, whew, so hot today. Hey, how you been? You doing okay? Do you see, whatever. You engage with them as a human being first. And then you come around to what it is you're trying to get. But it's a conversation. It's a guided conversation. It's never a list of questions. And so you saw the pictures of all the people from the Ulithi Atoll community that I had to talk to. And that's because knowledge is proprietary there. So if you want to know about that, you got to talk to somebody from that family. They're the keeper of that knowledge, and so forth and so on. But I might be talking to somebody about one topic, and he or she will go off and tell me about 3 or 4 other things which I know in my mind. Okay, that goes into that part of the grid, and that goes into that part of the grid, and that goes into that part of the grid. And I'm just sitting there going, and can you tell me more about that? And I'll take them off on that direction if they want to go on that direction. And sometimes they'll be telling me stuff that I think this is absolutely of no use to me at all. And then later, I find that it really was. So it's an organic process, I would say.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I can keep going through these.
All right.
What current initiatives exist for people to engage with traditional knowledge and culture and use it to engage the public, specifically through agriculture geared toward community building?
Wow. A very good question. Agriculture, of course, is fundamental. Food production is one of the most basic things that we do. There are lots of things happening out there in the indigenous world. And there are things that you can do in your own lives, not necessarily using traditional or indigenous knowledge, but using modern versions thereof, organic farming, and so forth. But, I was into third world development. That was my thing. And I started out with agricultural geography. I wanted to get into world hunger. I'm not a farmer. I grow some plants, but I'm not a farmer. But I'm looking at it from more sort of an organizational standpoint. And what I learned was how, particularly in the post-World War II era, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and some of these big UN-related bodies, and the development discipline really pushed modern, what they call scientific agriculture, which involves a combination of hybridized seeds, chemical fertilizer, chemical herbicides, and pesticides. And if you do it right, you get outrageously productive yields. You do it wrong, and you don't. And either way, you're putting a lot of chemicals into the ground, and you're spending an awful lot of money that's going to the petrochemical industry. And can we do it? And at the same time, they were saying all that traditional knowledge is just plain old-fashioned stuff. You just forget about it. These are people who've been doing it, sometimes in some places, for thousands of years. They know everything about the climate, everything about the soil. They're hedging their bets. They know how scientifically, mathematically, they figured out the odds of how much of which of each crop to plant so that no matter what happens, they're going to get the best possible yield out of it. And how to treat it respectfully and to share and to not be thinking, I'm in this to make the most money for myself and think economically rational. I actually read articles that talked about religion and development and said, well, the problem with this society is they're still hanging on to these old religious beliefs. If we could just get rid of that or sort of move it towards a more Protestant model where they have a Protestant work ethic, then we're really going to get something out of this. So I started to question the whole word development. What do we mean? I mean, that generally indicates something positive that's happening. But I started to look at these means and these methods, and this is why I ultimately didn't go into that field. It's like, this is not really progress. It's very uneven. Now, I know in Indian country, I know in Hawaii, there are lots of initiatives bringing back traditional agriculture, bringing back traditional crops. Heirloom seeds, it's a huge issue, sort of keeping the old seeds. And we're fighting against Monsanto and these huge corporations that want to control the seeds. You know, Monsanto they created something, they tried to get it approved called the Terminator seed. Arnold was not involved. And the Terminator seed meant that you would not be able to harvest, once you harvested the crop, the seeds would not be viable to grow the next batch. You'd have to go back to Monsanto to buy the seeds for planting the next crop. Whereas these farmers for millennia, for all of human history, have always been saving a portion of the seeds to plant the next crop. Well, this wasn't allowed to happen, but they actually tried to do it. So this is what we're up against. And so anything that any of us can do to work in the opposite direction, even if you just grow a little plot of land wherever you are. I mean, we should be growing, in my opinion, food on the nature strips next to the street. Why not? We could, on our rooftops. So I'm not sure that exactly answers the question because there's a lot more detail that I have to get into, but I hope that's a good start.
Yeah, there were a couple that you touched on having to do with your thoughts on, multinational structures that are trying to place rules that are affecting these.
It's scary,
more
people. It's
practices.
really scary the way corporations are taking over the world. And unfortunately, it's particularly scary right at this moment with the crowd that we have running this country, who are all into, from all appearances, corporations running the world. Let's remove the restrictions that keep them from doing that. Let's get rid of those banking rules that we put in place after the 2008 crash. We don't need those silly old rules anymore. We don't need those environmental restrictions on this, that, and the other thing. What we need to do is make more money. For whom? For them, for a small group of people who are getting richer and richer. One of the exercises I used to do, and I taught a class called World Regional Geography. It's the class that turned me into a geographer. It's a trip around the world from your seat in the classroom. Nothing's more fun than that. You learn everything: agriculture, industry, population, weather, climate, geomorphology, religion, culture, all this kind of stuff. And I would have them go to various data sources and gather data. And one of those sources, the Human Development Index put out by the United Nations, all online now, everything's online. And so development used to be measured by GNP per capita. How much money is the country making? We divide it by the population. There, you've got a number. We can measure that. Well, it's taken a while, but over the last few decades, started to realize, well, actually, that's not the best indicator. Because you can have that number, and it turns out that 3% of the population is making 70% of the wealth, and the rest is going to everybody else. That's social inequity. Do we want that? I keep asking the question, what kind of society do you want to live in? Do you want to end up living in a gated community because there's the poor masses out there, and you're in there with your wealth, and you want to be happy, but you got to drive through this crowd every day? Well, I had a friend who, when I was growing up, he was young, he worked out of Chile in Venezuela, and that's what it was like for him. He said, yeah, we drove out of there in the limousine every day, and people were, it was crazy. So I got that sort of early on. I'm kind of figuring that this group of people running the country right now figure that they're going to live under the bubble. You know, once the climate change has really sort of screwed everything up, they're going to build the bubble, and they're going to be in there, and the rest of us are going to be outside scrounging around trying to survive, because I don't know what else they're thinking, because they're not thinking forward. They're not thinking, how are we all, they're not seeing that we're all on this canoe together. We're not all going to get to the destination, but it's okay if only some of us do. That's okay, because we earned it. And, you know, you can go into Marxist theory, which is always fun. I don't go too deeply into it, but, you know, Marx was such a great observer and analyst of capitalism and how it produces social inequality. And it always amuses me that he was writing pretty much the same time that Charles Dickens was writing his novels describing the same sort of circumstances. And we have all these things that we as a society, or we as societies around the world, have put into place. Yes, we want child labor laws. We want maternity leave. We want safety in the workplace. We want social security safety nets, which we have the weakest one in this country among most of the developed countries in the world. And part of the problem in the United States, and I'll try to keep it in it with this point, is that we think what happens in this country is the norm. It's not. This is an aberration. It really is. Look at the statistics of what's going on in Europe. Look at, you know, every other developed country in the world has socialized health care, universal health care, free education in a lot of cases. Why don't we? Well, because we're the best country on earth? What kind of argument is that? We can't learn from somebody else? That would be wrong. What kind of argument is that? That's what I call stupid where I come from. So I'm going to go back now to end there.
Any other questions from the floor? Can I have a microphone over here, please?
Thank you for coming down the stairs.
Thanks, Krista.
So it sounds like your project that you're working on now, you are learning traditional knowledge orally from those who can still pass it on. What is your take on trying to learn traditional knowledge from cultures where we don't really have anyone who's still alive, and we just have literature for these traditional knowledges, and normally the people who wrote these literature would be the wealthy people at the time who maybe might not have actually done the activities that they're writing about. And I know you say that a lot of what is important is to actually go out and do these activities, whereas the literature that we have is by authors who may not have actually done it. So what is your take on trying to learn about traditional knowledge from a culture like that?
It's a great question, and my advice would be go out and try to actually do it. Take their description, see if it works. And there's people who've done this, you know, who, well, this is the best we have, is this description. So somebody says, okay, well, let's try to build it and see if it works. And they try, and they, well, no, actually that doesn't work. But if we tweak it this way, or if we change this or change that, then we find out that it does work. And we just didn't have complete information. So it's not until you actually try to do it that you find out whether or not it's right about it. And, you know, in the business of trying to do it, you've learned a whole lot. I'm talking to a class after this that's sort of ancient sustainability. What's it called? She's from your class? Yeah, no, I assumed as much. And my ex-wife was a class assistant. You know, I went to Greece with her and, you know, looked at all this stuff. I loved Greece. I was fascinated. But, you know, I started asking myself, as soon as I heard about your class, I started asking myself those same questions. Like, has anybody tried building a trireme? How did it go? You know, I know they have, right? Yeah, and it went pretty well, but they probably had to tweak it a lot before they figured out exactly how to get it right. Because all you had was description and some drawings. Same with Hokulea. They had no model for building Hokulea. They had existing Hawaiian canoes, none of which were anywhere near that big. They had some drawings and descriptions, and as people point out, the descriptions, which is getting back to your point, the descriptions were not written by boat builders, or the drawings were not done by boat builders. So they're not seeing the details that needed to be captured if you wanted an actual drawing, because they don't know what those would be. And also a lot of traditional anthropology, especially like back in the 1920s and 30s, the white male anthropologist would go, and whom would he talk to? The men. And do the men know everything about the culture? No. Are the men going to pretend that they know everything about the culture? Yes. So you get a lot of garbled information because, you put somebody on the spot to be a knowledgeable person, they're going to try to live up to it. And they'll tell you any kind of nonsense, if they have to sort of come across that way. I spent a year and a half in Australia where I connected with some Aboriginal people. And in Australian Aboriginal culture, they talk about secret women's business. There's also secret men's business, but there's secret women's business. You're not supposed to know about it. If you're not a man, if you're not a woman, it's not your business. It's secret. And that's good, and that's as it should be.
One last question from the floor. Sylvia?
How does one get to do what you do?
Well, as I've tried to sort of put across in my talk, there are a lot of random incidents that led me to doing it, including actually going in to make a photocopy and the guy in front of me had left his original on the machine, and I picked it up and read it, and that's what put me on this path. It can be that random. But if you want to set out intentionally to do it, I would say study everything you can, but particularly ethnography. That's really what I do. I call it geography. I call it indigenous geography, but it's essentially ethnography. I'm not a trained ethnographer. I'm self-taught. There's a lot of things that I should do that I don't do, and a lot of records that I should keep that I don't keep, and someday I'll pay for that, I'm sure. But that's it. Do I get to end with a closing thought?
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories. I'm going to stand up for this. Oop. Okay, so in Zen Buddhism, in Buddhism generally, as I said, you're not supposed to lie, cheat, kill, all these sort of bad things. In fact, the general message of all world religions of the spiritual path is do no harm, right? Okay, so one day, the Zen master gathers his pupils around. They're out in the forest in their little monastery or whatever, and he says, okay, here's what I want you to do today. I want you to go to a place in the forest where no one is watching, and when the first traveler comes along, I want you to beat him and rob him. Whoa, students all go, okay, if that's what you say, and off they go, except one. And the master says, well, what's the matter with you? And the student says, it can't be done. Why not? Because wherever I go in the forest, I will be watching. Thank you.